My previous video was about some of the best moments in anime where the protagonist fails, where we did some quick dives into such moments. Now, Mob Psycho Episode 5's Unknown Percentage was originally supposed to be in that video, but going back to rewatch part of the series, I decided it really deserved a video of its own, and in fact, the first half of Mob Psycho 100 leading up to that moment did as well. I'm generally not a fan of overpowered characters, but one managed to perfect the formula in a very weird way. There's many ways where elements of his work would annoy me in any other anime or manga, but the timing of their use, the quality of their execution, and how they play on usual tropes and his own style turns them more from overused gags into fantastic pieces of expression. But it's about time we get into it, so get ready for some slight Mob Psycho 100 spoilers as we get rolling here. First, I want to address my major gripe I would have with Mob Psycho. It does a lot of telling, even when it does a perfectly fine job just showing. This, for example, is exactly what I mean.
Yes! A direct hit!
There's no need to have this line because we see it, he sees it, everyone sees it. Let's take his reaction and just make it a simple smirk while he goes in for the next hit. That could be enough. You get the idea without having it read directly to you. Although it ensures the feeling of the moment or scene comes across, I often feel it cheapens scenes by eliminating any thought and connection gained from said thought. I could and will point to even more moments like these.
Can't believe a guy was trembling so much just from dealing with some high school girls. You must be quite the reliable gentleman.
Oh, you're safe!
Yeah, that evil spirit wasn't very powerful.
No way! Who are you?
A girl wouldn't write "I'm a girl."
Seriously, no one's gonna fall for that. But he did.
Everything we're supposed to feel from Mob Psycho is mostly read to us down to showing his mental state in a percentage and then exploding into a singular emotion. I love these moments and elements, but there's no denying they're cheap in a sense. And it's not just Mob who's put out in the open like that. Every character is very singularly defined, at least for most of Season 1. Reigen is a nearly fully comedic character whose charisma's his way through a somewhat sham business. Dimple just wants to have as much attention as possible, worshipped as God. Teru starts as a walking caricature of overcompensation, being exactly what Mob says he is in Episode 5. They aren't complex characters, at least not yet. This is the case for any show, but the timeline is exaggerated in Mob Psycho, delaying most of the real development. You think this would be a recipe for disaster, but these elements we just went over work perfectly here. A wise man once said, "Find what your niche is, that leads to riches." Now, that man may or may not have been Hank Hill from Texas's very own anime, but it's a very applicable quote here. I've talked about anime like Gurren Lagann who lean into their niche and break past the point of ridiculousness and back into enjoyability because they do exactly what they wanted to do exceptionally well. It's not about substance, but instead raw feel. Here it's a similar case, where simplicity is so core to Mob Psycho that these moments work to actually further the anime. Now, is this kind of just like saying it's just so good that it works? It is a little bit, but there's more to it than that. To really show this, let's look at an anime where it doesn't quite work. This actually takes us back to one of my first ever discussions on Akame ga Kill. It's an anime that follows a band of assassins fighting against a corrupt empire from the shadows. And based on this, the main cast state that they're not heroes, but just murderers fighting for their cause. They might fight evil people, but they still kill nonetheless. This is a nice premise, but it's mostly abandoned after a few episodes while the cast runs around doing heroic things and killing such obvious villains there's little to no gray area. Yet in the final moments of the anime, a narrator comes on to say, "They were remembered as a band of no good murderers." Now, this is where I start to hate the anime and where I may or may not have written in my notes "fuck you" in all caps because it tried to force such a specific feeling on me without doing any of the legwork. This is how we want you to feel, so you should feel it. Now, the anime does have some redeeming qualities, but it's a very average watch and nothing more. I never thought about it after I finished it except to bitch about that one singular point. And, well, except for, that. Mob Psycho is better with this telling than most because it shows and tells at least. While it's not perfect, there's no feeling that the anime is, say, cheating you out of something or forcing a feeling. You understand what's going on and why, and then it's quite bluntly reinforced. Seems alright, but remember how simple this series is. There's quite a lot of beauty in simplicity here, from Mob's design to the rough and raw animation that pairs with the outpouring of straight emotion. When your story is about a simple boy with simple emotions and simple desires, this is quite the apt way to do things. And let's state it again, Mob is a simple character. His emotions are literally compartmentalized, so when he feels something, it's very obviously stated. He has simple desires and goals, like working out because that's how to get his crush to notice him. Because that seems to work for other people, so why not him? His ideals are based on one thing Reigen told him as a kid, and that speech defines his entire ethos, his conflict with every villain so far. He's distracted by simple occurrences, triggered by basic statements, and so on. Mob is a character who essentially narrates exactly what he is, just by existing. Plus, simplistic villains means Mob can have very duality-based conflicts which are super easy to understand. Dimple wants godly popularity and uses his powers to do so. Mob would love to be popular, but refuses to use his powers to do so. Their difference is purely ideal-based and more than plain as day to see. And then we move to Teru, who wants to be confident and uses his powers to do so, and Mob, who wants to be confident but refuses to use his powers to do so. Once again, pretty much the exact same situation. These conflicts are exceptionally easy to understand, and the complete reinforcement of the ideals leaves all the room for contemplation to the feel of the scene, the emotions present, rather than the content itself. And since Mob doesn't have much feel or emotion to him at most points, this means he and the villain trade off the spotlight, creating idealized pockets of quite pure emotion, and that alone. This exact blend focuses on one thing and then dials it up to, I was gonna say 11, but it's more like 17. Instead of shoving everything in your face, and it still does shove some things in your face, don't get me wrong, what it does more is take everything else away so there's no distraction. This is what you're supposed to feel, and you have to focus on it because there's nothing else. A simple concept executed perfectly for what it is. Helping with this is something I love talking about, and that's moments that pull double, triple, or even sometimes quadruple duty. That's things like comedic moments that further character, fights that develop the comedic style, or plot points tied directly into a character's being. Opera Ranman is a recent anime that comes to mind for this, often meshing its comedy and character in one quite seamless package. There's a lot of little details, like Opera eating a sandwich nearly whole because he's a workaholic slob who wants to get back to doing what he does. It's funny to see, but it actually means something as well. I'd highly recommend Opera Ranman if you're looking for something lighthearted and ludicrously awesome. But let's get back to Mob Psycho. Now, Mob Psycho looks at double duty moments like that and scoffs because it uses the superpowered protagonist to its fullest extent. To show this, let's look at just the very first spirit in episode 1. We start with Reigen, who's a being of pure comedy, charisma, and complete bluff. He's incompetent at what he does, but manages through his other talents. The exaggerated animation is used to exemplify all of these elements of his character, and it uses an ugly nature to its advantage. These characters aren't attractive as a method to grab attention and develop a unique style, but also to set precedents that will be broken later in near self-parody. Now, Reigen fails at dispatching the spirit, so it sits and waits until Mob shows up, something you think it wouldn't do. It doesn't feel urgent, because it isn't. It's a trifling issue even for those who seek to end it. Most of all, it presents Mob as an immediately overpowered character, a stark contrast against Reigen, and that one's no secret at all. But in the same spirit-killing breath, we also see just how different he is from everyone else, down to appearances against characters like the butt-chin goblin. He doesn't behave like these people because he's not like them, and we see that very clearly in how they're represented. And this same dry nature adds ample comedic opportunities contrasted against his master Reigen, a non-serious duality like he has with his rivals. This one snippet of a few seconds does so many things it's almost dizzying, and again they're all so simple so nothing is lost while it's happening. Well, at first they may just be comedic moments, they may just be laughs that bring you in. When you go back and look at them, they're all developing precedents that will be set and broken later. They're all adding very simple layers to Mob's character. Every moment meshed with every idea, concept, and other moment of the anime. I could name any number of other moments like this one, from the spoon bending right after Reigen mentioned control of his powers, subtle and instant hinting at the future, to even Mob competing in the staring contest because he loves milk, showing his naivety and lack of acuteness. Every single thing in this anime is funny and also doing 17 other things that accomplish one singular thing. It's hard to explain, and honestly something you don't see in many anime because it's hard to pull off, but it's done so perfectly well here. So far, we've talked about how the series keeps things simple for easy understanding, using dual utility moments to develop these straightforward characters and scenes, and ensuring nothing is lost by meshing these ideas together at every turn. But what does this all lead to? It's all well and good, but what does it really do? Now, I mentioned Gurren Lagann earlier as a similar anime and am about to spoil parts of it here, so skip to this time on screen to avoid that. But what would it be without Kamina's death? Up to that point, the anime is similarly simple, crafting a slow burn that sets ablaze in manly spirit with undertones of loss and sacrifice. Without that, it's a fun anime, but no better than your average bunch. That flip after establishing the seemingly core elements of the series is what matters. This rug pull takes place in episode 5, but starts with the moments we already talked about, opening with Mob and Reigen as established characters in duality. Another consequence of the show's tell and show nature, paired with the full utility moments, is a heavy dose of expectation. The first time Mob dispatches a spirit, it's quick and comedic, not focused on action or drama. It's a funny moment to cap off a funny scene. Then, in the same episode, the tunnel plays out essentially the same way. Reigen fakes his way through things, and Mob handles the reality of the situation, but in such an overly dry and naive manner, it's anything other than serious. Now, at first, the tunnel spirits do something slightly different, with a backstory that has some legitimate tones to it, rather than a simple cockroach joke. They're the remnants of people who died in an accident, and that's nothing to be laughed at. So the show has you laugh at something else. Mob. He's off to the side just watching ants with awe. It's a complete disconnect that establishes serious moments as something else. The opening of a joke, usually with Mob or Reigen as the punchline. And this is repeated as we see the backstory of the accident is a banana peel, the stereotypical butt end of prop comedy. Nothing is quite holy in Mob Psycho, like Mob's lack of presence or confidence in episode 2. It's a serious issue and one that'll be important later, but at first it's nothing more than the vessel of a joke, at least on the surface. Nothing is really playing single duty here. But these girls beat his spirit into the ground for comedy, and everything continues. There's a bit of darkness at the end of episode 2, but nothing that isn't really just a reinforcement of these earlier jokes. A formula starts to establish, a sort of cycle of feign meaningful intent, flip the situation, laugh, and repeat, with just a few cracks showing here and there. Then Dimple comes along and gives us the first explosion of Mob's feelings. Again, it's building on the same elements as before, Mob trying to be popular for his simple goals, his gullibility to fall for such a situation, and so on. You could say this moment breaks from the formula, and it does a little bit. This fight is much longer than previous ones, but Mob still doesn't really have any issue taking down his foe. It's honestly developing it as more of a shonen. This is a very shonen-like fight with ridiculous action, immediately regrowing limbs, and beams of energy from the face. It's badass, but there's not much special here. It's even the most basic emotion for such a fight, rage, and it doesn't bring anything more to the table than what we already know. We've technically already seen this sort of explosive power in the very intro scene, so this is pretty expected. It's still a great moment, still above expectations from what we see in that just under a minute, I believe, but it's along the lines of expectation from what we have seen so far. I'd say it's more helping to establish the oh shit moments of the formula than breaking it. Let's look more at the lead up to his explosion of emotion. One of the final nails in the LOL coffin is a staring contest where they laugh and spit milk on each other. The entire religion itself is based on laughter. It's named LOL, and although Dimple has awful intentions, he's doing it in a literally joke-based way, and one that's more entertaining and over the top than anything else. The animation extends the same exaggerations for comedic effect into this scene as well. And it's just another fish out of water situation for Mob, the same as he is with Reigen. Now, Mob slows things down to a hint of something genuine right here, and then it's gone just like that. Just like the spirits earlier. While it may be a little bit different, it's not quite new. It's using the same elements in a different way. Especially afterwards, when we end on Reigen and his spin on the situation is, your negatives were actually a positive.
Today you were able to save a group of people that only you could have saved, so you should be proud of yourself.
A fine message, but a very shonen one that removes any complexity from the situation. It's summed up simply, only bringing in the themes we've already covered, because it was so simple. His emotional state resets, and then jumps up again, even setting it as the target of jokes, as it is with these two scenes.
We're going to Black Vinegar Middle School to get Kageyama back!
You're dead!
Even that, one of the defining visuals and elements of the series, is nothing more than a joke in these moments. The next intense moment is episode 5, as 4 mostly serves to build up the usual suspects. Mob falls for a horrible setup due to extreme gullibility. The situation focuses on other, very caricature-like characters before transferring to Mob, and the villain is very one-dimensional and easy to figure out, and he calls them out on using their powers for less ideal causes, shaping them as opposite. It looks like everything with Teru will be the same as it was with Dimple because the setup is almost identical, even down to the initial stages of his fight being much like it was with Dimple. Teru has named attacks and fights in a very exaggerated fashion. He ends Dimple, for now, and Mob has a reverse good times montage playing on what would usually happen before an emotional fight in anime, typically in shonens. The counter builds, but we know what that means now, and it's already less meaningful. Then right before the near shock of Teru's rage, Mob accidentally shaves his head, bringing the physical comedy and ugly looks that led off the series back into the fold. And then Teru goes from actual knives as weapons to a tie imbued with power. There's no way this moment could get serious. It's funny stuff, it does what it's supposed to do on the surface. But at the heart of their conflict is one change that matters. This is Mob's first fight against another person. The core of Mob's character is other people. They're more interesting, they lead his life more so than he does, and his ideals are based around them, from getting fit for love to refusing to use his powers against others. It's all about a genuine love for people who aren't him. And he puts that to work, recognizing the same issues in Teru that are in himself. And that attempted helpfulness leads to this.
Shut up! He's not using his powers.
It's almost out of place, and it throws the entire build-up and expectation of the series right into the bin. This scene hits like a dump truck. There's no more powers, just real physical contest, a battle of clear life and death as all these shonen elements are dropped. The ugly faces aren't funny anymore, they're uncomfortable. Mob has a flashback to real injury, the first sight of blood in the entire anime. The usual color and flash of the anime is completely void, leaving a nearly black and white setting. The counter that was just a cog in the joke machine is all of a sudden there and in your faces as Mob is almost dying to an insane child. It's exactly like Teru thinks.
What am I doing? How did this happen?
How did we get here from there? The characters and their fight make sense. Everything is easy to understand, but the tonal shift has little basis. You would think it might feel jarring, this moment that was unexpected, but not unreasonable, because everything around it is so plain and simple. This is where that lack of traditional complexity is really genius, once again leaving the space open to raw emotion, only this time in a way that's dangerous and real. That's the focus, the ideological battle centering on simple differences that were put into place and reinforced over 5 episodes in a way so clear it can't be anything else. They shout these ideals at each other, and Mob is tested to the extremes on his side. He loves people, but he might have to hurt one. Easily relatable, easily digestible, so you don't have to worry about how or why, just focus on the shock and awe. While I do love my complex anime, there is something to be said about this digestibility. Now, I've met people who hate my favorite anime of all time, Psycho Pass. I've never met someone who hates Mob Psycho. For how much I love the former of the Psychos, it took me many passes to understand and appreciate every character or scene. Every pass I discover something a little bit new to appreciate. And it's very much the story of Akane's internal struggle between being an ideal citizen and trying to understand that very society and its overlords. She goes through a lot of trauma and a lot of changes with many characters. The specific scene I think of is when Akane has sort of interactive flashbacks to some of the pivotal moments of the series. It takes time to take it all in, because it covers Kagari, Yuki, Makishima, Sybil, and more all at once. It's a revelation, world-changing almost. So is Mob Psycho's episode 5, but that's understood immediately. One watch tells you everything you need to know. That may be a sign of a lack of complexity, and that is true, but it's perfectly executed in an excellent level of shock value with truth to the undertones of the series. The multi-duty moments now show what they were doing behind the scenes, all the jokes about Mob's character now being shown in a serious light. His lack of confidence that was called out before, nearly getting him killed. His negative amount of social skills allow him to say all of this directly, but out of a want to help people. His dry nature fading away under the stress of physical altercation. And the subversion isn't done there, introducing us to his unknown percentage form, not even letting us have some comfort in knowing what comes next. It could be anything, it's literally unknown. The counter getting cut off before reaching 100% is pretty much peak expectation subversion. It's the most simple element to understand, it's the most hype element of the series, and then it's just gone, it's cut. We don't know what could come after this, and it's literally defined as unknown. And it brings in the same raw and rough elements as before, but used for uncertainty and danger rather than comedy. The lack of color once again. Teru gets stripped, but it's not funny, it's again more uncomfortable than anything else. There's not as much room to laugh. Where there were once 2 or 3 aspects to Mob character, now there's 3 or 4. As you start to realize what's always been there as the moment dies down into Mob's sadness. He sees what's there as we see it too. He failed at a simple goal. It's a very pure sadness, the realization of not loss, but the feeling of loss. The loss of future, not something in the present. And then soon after, it returns to the jokes, cutting any discussion between the two rivals short. Teru's changed, and everything goes back to normal. Only now there's something lurking under the surface. As Ritsu says to end the episode,
Back then, that wasn't him. That wasn't my brother.
Things may go back to how they were, and Mob Psycho loses none of its feel and style, but it gains so much in adapting them for that one single scene. And from here, and with Season 2, the anime, its themes and characters blossom into much more than the simple ideals they were up until now. This halt in development to expedite it later is fantastic and creates one of the standout scenes in anime and one of the greatest series for what it is. It's not overly complex or deep in its message, but it doesn't need to be because it does those things more exceptionally than almost any anime. Find what works and knock it out of the park, much like Mob is with his powers. One thing that doesn't define him, but makes him stand out from the crowd. So I guess it's quite fitting that the creator chose one for a pseudonym. I don't think there's anything basic about taking pure ideas and doing them as perfectly as you can. I think it's very respectable to hold yourself to that standard. I find myself all over the place with my ideas all the time, and it probably holds me back. So in that regard, and in many others, I love Mob Psycho. I love Mob. I love what the series preaches and stands for as an amazing work of art and meta self-subversion at times. It's simple, but has a lot going on, a lot to appreciate in that simplicity. I also love it for Reigen, but that one's just obvious, huh? So, actually speaking of being all over the place, you probably noticed this discussion was a bit different than some of the more recent ones since I came back. It was much more technically focused, with a little bit of theme and so on sprinkled in, and it was fun to talk about a series more like that once again, because I kind of started on a mix of theme and, what worked and what didn't, the technical stuff, and evolved into, especially recently, kind of working through my own issues through discussions and very thematic and abstract concepts, which I do love. But again, it was very nice to take a step back and look at an anime that, and just appreciate what I love about it and try to put that into words for other people as well. And it's also a weird thing because at the end of the day, I would like to one day take the stories from my head and put them out there for other people to watch as well. So I like doing this as kind of a practice and again, looking at what works and what I love in series, so I know what I will want to hopefully do one day as well. So this was a very interesting video put together. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. And you can let me know by leaving a like or a comment saying so. You can also let me know what you want to see me tackle in future videos, anything like that. If you thought I missed something, or if you thought I was wrong, leave a dislike if you thought I was wrong. I just like to get a gauge of, what you enjoy and what I can make to make the best content for you. I'm sorry, I'm very bad with words when I'm just going off the cuff like this. That's why my outros are so bad. At least I didn't say intros in place of outros there. But I'll have some links in the description as well to my Twitter, which I'm going to try to start using more recently. Maybe live tweet some thoughts about the anime I'm watching, even though they're old anime for the most part, and my Discord as well, where I'm going to hopefully have some discussion hours going on soon, which is just a nice hangout where I can chat with fans in a more, not one-on-one, because I'm hoping there will be a few people in there, but a nice place where, because I'm so busy and can't always get back to every comment or every message in my Discord, that you can ask questions to me or talk about themes or whatever you want to do more directly. So I'm going to try to start getting that going down below. So links to those if you're interested. I spent way too much time going over that stuff. This outro is probably 3 goddamn minutes by now. So I guess I'll say what I always do and, point to bought my mic, point to the other videos on screen right now, the subscribe thing over my face, and just say thank you for watching. And I really hope after a bad outro like this that I'll see you again soon.